On July 5, 1954, in a modest Memphis studio, three musicians fused gospel, country, and raw rhythm and blues, creating a sound no one had ever heard before. Within 4 years, rock and roll sales would triple, youth culture would revolt, and stage performance itself would never look the same. But how did a single session ignite a chain reaction that changed music forever, and who risked everything to make it happen? The answer starts at the very first note. Inside Sun Studio, the air was thick and still, and the clock ticked past midnight as three musicians circled around a battered microphone. Elvis Presley, just 19, strummed his acoustic guitar in a loose, bluesy rhythm, riffing on Arthur Crudup's song, That's All Right. Bill Black slapped the upright bass, adding a percussive pop that bounced off the studio's hard walls. Scotty Moore's electric guitar answered each line with clipped, country-inflected licks. In that moment, the boundaries between genres vanished. Listen closely to the track that came out of that session. The heartbeat is pure rhythm and blues, driven by the bass's syncopated slap and a backbeat that refuses to sit still. But layered over this is the storytelling style of country, Presley's phrasing, the way he bends words and slides between notes, owes as much to Hank Williams as to Muddy Waters. Gospel comes in through the voice, Elvis's vocal attack, his use of melisma and blue notes, the way he turns a simple lyric into something ecstatic. He does not sing so much as testify, breaking phrases apart, letting syllables hang in the air or tumble into each other. The song's structure is simple, yet the chord progression is slippery. Instead of sticking to strict blues or country forms, the trio plays fast and loose with the changes. The result is a sound that feels both familiar and completely new. Critics and musicians later called it rockabilly, but in 1954 there was no name for this kind of collision. The energy comes from the tension between the parts. The rhythm and blues groove pushes forward, the country guitar pulls sideways, and the gospel-inflected voice soars above it all. What makes this fusion stand out is not just the combination of genres, but the way each ingredient keeps its character. The slap bass does not try to sound like a drum kit. It stays raw and physical. The guitar lines echo bluegrass, but are delivered with the urgency of jump blues. The vocal phrasing borrows from church, but the attitude is pure rebellion. Sam Phillips, working the controls, captured the take in a single, spontaneous burst. No overdubs, no polish, just the sound of something being invented in real time. This hybrid, born from a late-night jam, set the template for what would follow. It felt unprecedented because it was. In 3 minutes, Elvis and his band made a record that sounded like America itself, restless, unpredictable, and wide open to possibility. Sam Phillips approached Sun Studio as more than a recording space. It was a collaborator, shaping every note that passed through its walls. The room itself was compact, its hard surfaces turning sound into something alive and unpredictable. With just 3 musicians, Elvis, Bill Black, and Scotty Moore, and no drummer, Phillips had to invent his own rules. He chose ribbon and dynamic microphones, the kind used in radio, and placed them to capture not only the instruments but the energy bouncing around the studio. Elvis's mic did not just record his voice. It picked up the snap of Black's bass, the edge of Moore's guitar, and the room's natural echo, blending them into a single, restless sound. Phillips rejected the idea of isolating each player. Instead, he let the sounds bleed together, turning the slap of the bass into the track's heartbeat. With no drums, every pop and thump from Black's fingers filled the gap, giving the music its pulse. The guitar amp sat close to the vocal mic, so its bark spilled into the mix, binding the trio together. What some might call a flaw, Phillips saw as the glue that made the music urgent, and unified. The real signature came from tape and from slapback echo. Phillips ran sessions through Ampex decks at 15 inches per second, a professional speed that preserved every nuance. He then fed the signal through a second tape machine, creating a slapback echo, a sharp single repeat, landing a fraction of a second after the original. This delay, between 1/10 and 2/10 of a second, made Elvis's voice sound larger, as if it echoed off the studio walls. Unlike the lush reverb of later years, this echo was tight and rhythmic, almost like a shadow vocalist. Phillips mixed live, blending slapback echo in real time. No overdubs, no retakes, just the raw, immediate sound of a room inventing rock and roll as it happened. In late 1955, RCA Victor made a calculated bet on a new sound from Memphis, paying $35,000 for Elvis Presley's contract. Steve Scholes, the A&R executive behind the move, immediately set RCA's promotion machine in motion. Memos went out to radio directors across the country, urging them to add Presley's debut single to their rotations. Within weeks, Heartbreak Hotel was pressed, shipped, and tracked by Billboard reporters from coast to coast. The results were immediate and measurable. Heartbreak Hotel soared to #1 on the pop chart in May 1956, and it held the top spot for 7 weeks. The single also claimed #1 on the country chart and topped the R&B sellers list, a rare triple chart sweep that few artists had managed before. By the end of its run, Heartbreak Hotel had sold over 1 million copies, earning gold status and setting a new standard for crossover success. RCA's internal data showed that in some regions, Presley's records made up nearly a third of youth-oriented radio playlists. This dominance was not isolated. In July 1956, Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel were released as a double-sided single, and both sides repeated the feat, hitting #1 on both pop and country charts, with Hound Dog also topping the R&B listings. By September, Presley's name filled Billboard's chart columns, and trade press headlines credited him with driving a 200% increase in national record sales from 1954 to 1958. RCA's financial reports noted that pre-orders for Heartbreak Hotel alone surpassed 300,000 units, unmatched by any previous rock or country release. Radio programmers, tracking listener requests, and jukebox spins reported a sharp shift in youth preferences. By mid-1956, major market stations had boosted rock and roll content by 20 to 30%, much of it driven by Presley's catalog. Billboard's annual report named Elvis as the main force behind this format change, noting how his records blurred boundaries between R&B, country, and pop. For the first time, a single artist was uniting audiences across racial and regional lines, not just in sound but in sales. Label executives studied the Presley phenomenon closely, mapping its spread and searching for patterns they could replicate. The commercial stakes had shifted. Presley's early RCA hits did not just top charts, they forced the industry to rethink how music was promoted, sold, and defined. On September 9, 1956, television's most watched variety show opened with a warning. CBS producers, anxious over complaints about Presley's earlier performances, ordered their cameras to frame him only from the waist up. The decision came down in an internal memo circulated just hours before air, instructing directors to avoid any shots that might provoke another round of angry letters. Sponsors threatened to pull out. The network's censors, already fielding calls from parents and clergy, braced for a backlash. In the studio, the atmosphere was electric. The live audience, mostly teenagers, filled the theater with nervous energy. As Elvis took the stage, the band hit the first chords of Don't Be Cruel. His voice was confident, but his body language was restless. Even restricted to upper body movement, he found new ways to channel the music. Shoulders rolled, arms sliced the air, and his face flashed a sly grin. Each phrase seemed to ripple through his torso, giving the sense that the energy had simply migrated upward. The crowd's reaction was immediate: shrieks, laughter, and a wall of applause that threatened to drown out the band. At home, the response was even more Elvis. That night, an estimated 82.6% of American TV viewers tuned in, over 60 million people. The press called it Elvis fever. Newspapers ran headlines about the spectacle, some mocking, others alarmed. Variety described the performance as a televised earthquake. Letters poured into the network, some praising Presley's talent, others denouncing his vulgarity. The waist-up restriction did little to dampen his impact. Instead, it forced a new kind of performance grammar. With his hips off limits, Elvis turned his upper body into the focal point. The camera caught every twitch, every flash of the eyes, every tension in his jaw. The result was a lesson in how much physicality could be packed into a single frame. For young viewers, this was a revelation. Music was no longer just something to listen to, but something to experience through the body, even if only in fragments. Network executives studied the numbers. The Nielsen share shattered previous records. Sponsors, despite their fears, saw sales spike. Behind the scenes, producers circulated memos about how to handle future appearances by rock and roll acts. The rules of televised performance had changed. Pop music, once a matter of crooners and polite applause, now pulsed with the energy of movement and spectacle, sometimes censored, but never contained. Elvis's censored broadcast set a template for generations. The body itself became part of the music, and television learned to harness controversy as fuel. In the aftermath, artists like James Brown and Mick Jagger would study these moments, building on the grammar of gesture and risk that Presley had introduced. Even under the camera's restrictions, the message was clear: performance could never go back to stillness. The boundaries between singer and spectacle, music and movement, had been permanently redrawn. Across the Mersey, in the late 1950s in Liverpool, a battered radio set flickered with American static. John Lennon, still a teenager, leaned in closer. The voice coming through the speaker was raw, elastic, and untamed. It did not just sound different, it redefined what music could be. Years later, Lennon would put it plainly: before Elvis, there was nothing. The effect was immediate and contagious. Within months of hearing Heartbreak Hotel, Lennon started the Quarrymen, a skiffle group that would eventually become the Beatles. Their early set lists read like an American jukebox. Presley's That's All Right, Baby Let's Play House, and Blue Moon of Kentucky were all staples. Lennon and Paul McCartney did not just cover these songs, they mimicked Elvis's vocal hiccups, his gliding phrasing, and the way he stretched a lyric until it snapped. In rehearsal tapes from the Cavern Club and Hamburg, the echoes of Presley's Sun and RCA recordings are unmistakable. The Beatles' own sound, two guitars, bass, drums, and a lead singer out front, mirrored the template Elvis had brought to national television just a few years before. But it was not just about the music. The idea of a charismatic frontman, supported by a tight band, became the new norm. Before Elvis, pop groups often hid behind the curtain or clustered in the shadows. After him, the singer stood center stage, commanding the room with swagger and intent. The Beatles adopted this stance, with Lennon and McCartney trading lead vocals and George Harrison and Ringo Starr providing the engine. Their look, slick hair, sharp suits, and an attitude that balanced rebellion with charm owed as much to Presley's image as to his sound. This was not imitation for its own sake. British bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Animals took the American formula and spun it back across the Atlantic. They repurposed the energy, the rhythm, and the performance style, layering on their own accents and sensibilities. The British invasion was not a revolution out of nowhere. It was a resurgence, powered by the shockwave Elvis had sent rippling through the music world. The frontman's role, the band lineup, the very structure of a rock group all traced a direct line back to those Sun and RCA sessions in Memphis, and to the restless figure who first showed what was possible. Mick Jagger once studied old footage of Elvis, searching for the secret behind that magnetic swagger. On stage with the Rolling Stones, Jagger's strut, hips loose, arms slicing the air, lips curled in a knowing sneer, carried echoes of those early television performances. It was not just imitation. Jagger took the grammar of movement that Presley had invented and pushed it further, making the body itself an instrument of rhythm and rebellion. His vocals too bore the influence, a rasp that cut through the guitars, a phrasing that bent and snapped like a dancer's spine. British critics called it shocking. American parents called it dangerous. But for a generation raised on static crooners, it was electrifying. The lineage did not stop there. Iggy Pop, fronting the Stooges, turned Presley's kinetic stagecraft into something raw and unpredictable. Where Elvis's hips suggested trouble, Iggy's whole body became a weapon, diving from the stage, writhing on the floor, sometimes bleeding, always pushing the boundary between music and mayhem. In interviews, Iggy credited those first glimpses of rock and roll television for showing him the power of physical risk. The idea that a singer could command a room not just with voice, but with every muscle and nerve came straight from watching Elvis break the rules on national TV. Bruce Springsteen, growing up in New Jersey, watched those same performances and saw possibility. His concerts became marathons of sweat and storytelling, with Springsteen leaping from the piano, sprinting across the stage and pulling the crowd into the drama. The microphone was not just a tool, it was a partner, passed from hand to hand, swung overhead, pressed against his chest for whispered confessions. Like Elvis, Springsteen used gesture and movement to make the music larger than life. He built narratives in real time, channeling the restless energy of a working-class bar band into arena-sized anthems. Each of these frontmen found their own voice, but the through line was unmistakable. Elvis had redrawn the blueprint for what a singer could do with a stage. The body became central. Every gesture, every risk, every flash of danger feeding the music itself. From Jagger's swagger to Iggy's chaos to Springsteen's storytelling, the modern rock archetype was born from the grammar Presley had written in Sweat and Motion. The spectacle of the frontman was no longer an accident, it was the spectacle. Arthur Crudup wrote That's All Right, the song that launched Elvis's career. Yet during the 1950s, his royalty checks rarely topped $15 at a time. While Presley's versions sold in the millions and generated tens of thousands of dollars in publishing revenue, Crudup himself saw only a single $60,000 settlement in 1972. 2 decades too late. Big Mama Thornton, who first recorded Hound Dog, was paid a flat session fee of around $500. She never received a share of the windfall when Elvis's cover became a cultural phenomenon. In Jet magazine and black newspapers, writers debated what it meant for a white singer to profit from black musical invention. Some praised Presley's energy, others called out the pattern black artists create, white artists cash in. These voices insisted on the difference between transmission and erasure. And the record industry's structure left originators in the margins, even as their sounds swept the nation. Genre lines that once seemed fixed are now almost invisible. On today's pop charts, the most successful tracks borrow freely from country, hip-hop, R&B, and electronic music, blending sounds that once belonged to separate worlds. Artists like Post Malone, Taylor Swift, and Billie Eilish build careers on this hybrid logic, moving between styles with the same ease that Elvis brought to his first Sun recordings. What was once a daring experiment is now the baseline. Genre blending is not a novelty. It is the grammar of pop itself. Producers layer trap beats under country melodies, rap verses flow into rock choruses, and gospel harmonies color electronic hooks. The musical blueprint that Elvis helped sketch, restless, open, and endlessly recombinant, has become the standard language of modern pop. Every hit that crosses categories carries a trace of that original fusion, proof that the rules Elvis broke are now the rules everyone follows. The sound Elvis sparked still shapes how artists perform, cross genres, and challenge old boundaries. In 2024, over 70 years later, his songs reach billions, streamed, sampled, reimagined. His impact is not trapped in nostalgia. It is alive each time music dares to reinvent itself. The future of popular sound still echoes with the risks he took. How music changes next depends on who is willing to break the rules again. Share your thoughts below.